Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for letting me address you. I take very seriously my responsibility to stand accountable to the legislature on a regular basis to make sure that I keep you abreast of what I'm doing and what the important issues are that we're facing as a country. I've noted from time to time that our country really had its start in many respects in 1773 when a group of patriots boarded a ship in Boston and discarded crates of English tea into the harbor in a symbolic act of protest against a national government that had become too big, too expensive, too inclined to tax, and too oppressive in its regulation. They were protesting against the kind of government they did not want, and they understood that it wasn't enough just to protest, just to shout and to complain about the kind of government they didn't want. They had to act. And so in the next few years, they declared and fought for and won their independence. It took them 14 years to get from Boston in 1773 to Philadelphia in 1787, where they at last outlined the kind of government they did want. It's time for us as Americans to come together and continue to address the things we don't want out of government, but more importantly, to move on and start to include the kinds of things we do want in government. Over the last year or so, I've been focusing intently on trying to find new ways that we can enhance economic opportunity in America. Economic opportunity of the sort that has made America a unique place, a uniquely desirable place in the world. A place where a man or a woman could be born in poverty and die wealthy. A place where most wealthy families in America today can remember a time when their own family was in poverty. In recent years, this has taken a hit, and we found that for the first time in American history, there are statistics showing that a person who is born in the bottom 20% has a 40% chance of remaining in the bottom 20% of our economy throughout the duration of his or her life. This is tragic, and we've got to address this. This economic opportunity crisis really does manifest itself at every level of the economic continuum. At the bottom of the ladder, we see it manifesting itself in the form of immobility among the poor. Those who are trying desperately to provide for the needs of their family but find themselves locked, sometimes in government programs, creating poverty traps that keep them in poverty. In the middle class, it shows up in the form of insecurity, where hardworking moms and dads want to provide for their families. They're able generally to do so, but they can't seem to get ahead. And occasionally they might see a raise, a cost of living increase at work, but no sooner have they achieved this additional income, no sooner have they received this raise than they find that many, if not most, of those gains have been eaten up in the form of taxes, in the form of inflation, in the form of higher costs brought on by a combination of fiscal policy and regulatory policy. Regulatory policy that has created a $2 trillion annual compliance cost in America. It's important to point out that those costs are passed downstream. They're not borne just by the wealthy. In fact, the companies that have to comply with those just charge higher prices for the goods and the services that they offer in the marketplace. That ends up affecting the poor and the middle class more than it does anyone else. So we've got immobility among the poor. We've got insecurity in the middle class. At the top of the economic ladder, we see something different, something very disturbing: cronyist privilege, where government policy will artificially prop up and hold in place those who have climbed their way up the ladder and are content with pulling up the ladder from behind them, making it harder and harder for others to get there. This shows up in many ways. It shows up in the form of government subsidies, where the government chooses winners and losers in certain industries. It shows up in the form of certain types of regulation that, more than anything else, tend to crowd out competition and further ensure that the incumbents in certain marketplaces remain wealthy and supported by the government. So I've been running a number of pieces of legislation that are designed to push forward a new conservative reform agenda, as I call it, something that's designed to help America's poor and middle class using basic conservative principles, animated by Abraham Lincoln's statement to Congress in 1861 that it's the fundamental purpose of government to clear the paths of laudable pursuit, to lift the artificial barriers that impede human beings from progressing and from finding their own destiny. Very often those barriers, those impediments to progress, are imposed or exacerbated by government itself. So we need to look for those barriers and try to remove them. To that end, I've introduced legislation that's designed to prop up and support and help restore the twin pillars of our opportunity society. One is institutions of voluntary civil society, and the other is the free marketplace. When we prop up and protect those two things, we find that economic opportunity abounds. So to that end, I've introduced a few bills. With that in mind, I've introduced a tax reform bill that would replace our current cumbersome, incomprehensible individual tax code with a two-rate system under which most Americans would pay under one simple rate of 15%. It gets rid of the marriage tax penalty. It also gets rid of the parent tax penalty, a little-known feature, an outgrowth, an implication of existing tax policy that needs to be addressed. I've introduced another bill designed to make higher education more affordable in this country while increasing the quality. And it does that by harnessing the power and the wisdom of the states, empowering state governments to set up their own alternative accreditation system. Currently, we have kind of a cartel that exists between the U.S. Department of Education, between our existing colleges and universities, and between accrediting bodies, all of which must receive their recognition from the U.S. Department of Education. We need to provide another path, a path that can open the door to Title IV funding for alternative educational opportunities. And with more providers, with more options, will come lower prices and higher quality. I've also introduced other measures that have received a lot of bipartisan support, that are neither Democratic nor Republican. They're neither liberal nor conservative. They're simply American. One of them relates to the ability of the government to pry into the personal details of your life. I'm running a bill with my friend Pat Leahy, a very liberal Democratic senator from Vermont, who's the president pro tem of the Senate and the current chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee on which I sit. This bill seeks to undo a little-known but very disturbing feature in federal law that's been in place for the last 26, 27 years. It says, in effect, that the government may read your email without a search warrant, so long as that email has ripened to the tender age of 180 days, 6 months. Sad, but true. Federal law does this currently. We're trying to undo that. I'm running other legislation with senators like Ron Wyden from Oregon and Tom Udall from New Mexico that seeks to restrict the ability of the NSA to peer into the personal details of your life, into the lives of American citizens through its electronic monitoring. NSA is there for foreign intelligence surveillance, not to surveil American citizens without a court order. With these things in mind, we can do better. And we can find that our best days as Americans really are ahead of us. But to do this, we have to restore those basic principles that have made America strong. And one of the things that we need to do that is to empower states once again to be the primary source of law in this country. We've drifted steadily from that over the last 75 years. We've done it with the support, not just the acquiescence, but the avid support of members of both political parties in Washington, D.C., who, once in Washington, forget that there is anything meaningful, anything sacred about maintaining power at the state level. It's my desire to restore the greatness of our society by restoring economic opportunity, and the way we do that is to clear the paths of laudable pursuit by getting the federal government out of the way where it's causing problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Lee. We'd love to, if you'd take a couple of questions.
Certainly.
Senator Urquhart.
Thank you. Senator Lee, thank you for being here. Thank you for your good work. So I have the privilege of chairing our Senate Appropriations Committee on Higher Education, and I have talked with you and your staff a bit about those responsibilities. Very proud of the state institutions we have and the good work they're doing. I think that they're headed in the right direction. They're reforming what they're doing to improve graduation rates and the quality of their product. You get very far along in the path of reforming higher education, and you do butt up against accreditation standards, which kind of limit the flexibility of what you might do with the system. So I'm very intrigued about what you're proposing with accreditation. Would you mind elaborating a bit more on that?
Sure. So how it works currently is that in order to participate in Title IV federal funding for higher education, you have to go after a degree provided by an accredited body, the one that is recognized by an accrediting body that is itself recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. A lot of these accrediting bodies work just fine. And I don't mean to take away anything from what they're doing or take away in any respect from the great things that a lot of existing institutions of higher learning are doing. They're doing a lot of great work. But I do think that we can expand the availability of this funding to more people by allowing federal funds to be used for more types of programs. Certain vocational programs and for example, massive open online courses, or MOOCs as they've become known, provide a tremendous opportunity for people to receive a low-cost, high-quality educational experience. Historically, it's taken a few things to come up with a higher education experience. You had to have professors, students, classrooms, and books, all within a relatively small location. That's how the modern college campus evolved. But with our information age economy and all that technology offers us, the world is flattening rather substantially, and there are a lot of opportunities for people to receive other types of training, other types of non-traditional higher educational experiences. But the existing accrediting structure, which operates solely under the authority and requires the recognition of the U.S. Department of Education, isn't equipped to handle that. We believe that state legislatures in particular, are well equipped to set up their own alternative accrediting system, one that could allow people to participate in things like massive open online courses and other vocational programs while receiving federal funding to do that. We also think that doing this would inevitably help temper the cost of higher education, because as you have more competition, you tend to find lower prices and better quality.
Senator Gert?
Let us know what we can do to help. Yeah, right now accreditation is on an institutional basis, and if you could do something to help and move it to a programmatic basis, a course-by-course basis, I mean, that education should be more about the outcomes. It should be more about the competencies, and accreditation sometimes gets in the way of that reform. So that's great work. Full speed ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you. And I do think that this is exactly what that would allow, because once the states have their own option of creating their own alternative accreditation system, they could, and I believe under the leadership of you and others who are concerned about this issue, create some of these program accrediting systems that currently operate in some areas of higher education, especially in some of our graduate programs, but typically don't operate in the undergraduate institution programs that you're talking about.
Senator Reid.
Thank you, Mr. President. Welcome, Senator Lee.
Thank you.
The last couple of years I've been working on legislation to reform welfare in the state. What happens is we run into barriers, federal barriers, that prevent us from, frankly, doing the right thing. What's happened in this nation is we treat all poverty the same. We don't distinguish between situational and intergenerational poverty. And we apply the same remedies, and when we do that, we enable intergenerational poverty and welfare dependency to continue. And the tragedy of that is that we condemn generations of children to a life of poverty and all the subsequent consequences in their lives. Of course, the data shows that they have higher rates of failure in school, dropping out of school, crime, drug and alcohol, teen pregnancy, suicide, and the like. I'm wondering, is anyone willing to address this in Congress? Does anyone really understand the problem, the core problem, that we're not distinguishing between the two types of poverty, and we're not focusing on children like we should? Rather, we're focusing on adults, hoping that it'll filter down to the children. You should know that in our state we have 52,000 children that are come from intergenerational families that are welfare dependent. The fourth generation, since we started keeping records on this, since 1989, is being born today in intergenerational poverty and welfare dependency. these are a direct result of federal policies that then force the states to comply. They're the wrong policies, they're wrong-headed, and they continue to condemn subsequent generations of children to all of these problems I've identified. What can you do to help us in the state break down some of the federal barriers so that we can put in policies in place that will make a difference for these children?
It's funny you should ask, and I'm glad you did. Just 1 week ago today, I introduced a bill that seeks to address a lot of these issues that you're talking about. And it recognizes, first of all, that our federal poverty programs have resulted in policies that are trapping people in poverty, and it isn't fair. And I don't blame the poor. I blame the government policies. These are failed policies that are keeping people in poverty. And so what this seeks to do is to create a system whereby people can be transitioned into gradual employment. And it does distinguish between the categories that you're talking about. It makes a distinction between those who are working age, able-bodied adults and those who are not in a position to work. And for those who are working age, able-bodied adults, it imposes some work requirements on them in these means-tested programs like SNAP and TANF and so forth to make sure that they are working and actively engaging in things that can lead to long-term employment to help get them off of poverty, so that you don't have this system that's been noted recently in an alarming statistic that came out, I believe it was printed in the National Review sometime last summer, where it said that in 34 states and the District of Columbia, a person in poverty would actually see his or her standard of living go down if that person took an entry-level job, because with that entry-level job might come an effective 90% marginal tax rate. By the time you add up the taxes they would pay plus the welfare benefits they would lose, they're actually effectively making less working than they are in poverty. But this is how the poverty trap starts, and this is how the poverty trap remains in place, is because it would be irrational, especially for a parent struggling with poverty, to take a job that would put his or her children in grave jeopardy. Parents are naturally, understandably, properly risk-averse when it comes to their children. So we need to come up with a system that incentivizes people to work, but transitions them into that without confronting them with this penalty. If you work, you're going to all of a sudden lose all these benefits, and this helps eliminate that. It also helps cap federal spending on means-tested programs. We've seen since 2007 a massive spike in our spending on means-tested programs, and it has far outpaced inflation. And so our desire is to get it back to those levels from when it started in 2007, adjusted for inflation, and to phase that in over a period of 3 years after the bill is enacted. It also gives states the flexibility and gives states the incentive to manage these means-tested programs in such a way as to make them more cost-effective. It gives the states the opportunity to receive a 25% return on the money that they've saved by reducing their welfare rolls, and then it creates an award system for the 3 states that do the most to transition people into employment and off of welfare. I'd be happy to send that over to you. I think you'd like it.
We'll take one more question. Anyone? Okay. Senator Jones.
Thank you. Welcome, Senator Lee. I have an issue that I'd like you to check with. I'm having trouble getting information back from our other representatives. It has to do with a pharmacy take-back program. As you know, prescription drug abuse is huge in Utah, and we're having in meeting with several different organizations over the years, we're looking to see what the federal hang-up is on getting a pharmacy take-back program. And if you could check on that for me, I would very much appreciate it.
Sure. I appreciate that. I will look into that and I'll find out. Are you aware of legislation that's been introduced, or is
it has been introduced, to my knowledge?
Has not. Okay, so the idea here is to set up a system whereby a pharmacy could serve as the sort of a depository for people to relinquish control of their controlled substance medicines once they're no longer using them so that they can be disposed of properly, so that they won't end up either in the hands of somebody selling them on the black market, otherwise abusing them, or flushing them down the toilet and thus introducing them into the municipal water supply. Is that
exactly? And
okay.
Providing some opportunities for pharmacies for, maybe having a nuance that others don't have.
I would assume that existing federal law and federal regulations not only don't provide for this, but they probably prohibit it because it's a transfer of a controlled substance.
Yes.
So what we need to do is lift that restriction on federal law that would currently prohibit a pharmacist from taking that and disposing of it properly.
Yes, thank you.
That's a great idea. I'll look into that and I'll work on it. Thank you very much, Senator Jones.
And thank you, Senator Lee. We appreciate your words and taking questions today.
Thank you.